Welcome, everyone who's been able to dial in. Excited to have some of you here on the call. And my name is Janine Yonzima Royan. I am the owner of JNP Coffee and founder of Burundi Farms International. And I'm also the regional coordinator for the Northeast for the ACA US chapter. I am very excited today to bring to you some of the most outstanding and resourceful speaker this afternoon. And the topic of our discussion today is going to be on transformational leadership. And today I have with me Mike Jaffe, Stephanie Johnson, and Nora Berkey. So I'm actually going to kick off this discussion by asking some questions to our panelists as we go. So each one of them are going to have about 10 minutes to present about the background and also about what they have to share with us today. We are going to have some time at the end for Q&A, but if anybody just have questions, just put them in the chat as we go. And some questions I might bring them forward in the middle of the discussion. Some other ones I might wait at the end of our call to bring them to the audience. So COVID-19 is a crisis that shocked or affected, all of us in so many ways, kind of like 9/11. And I'm very curious about what lessons this crisis have actually brought us today, and what transformational leadership are we seeing emerging from all of this. And I am going to start with a big question to Mike Jaffe about what does human wake-up call means. He even trademarked. So I cannot wait to hear about what you have to share. Mike, please welcome and introduce
Thank you.
yourself. And now you can start asking the question as we go.
Thank you very much, Dean. Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here. I appreciate that. Just quickly, how I got there in my experience. Back then, I was in a job that was a good company and a good job. It just didn't have any meaning for me. And I look at what the SCA does and what Chain Collaborative does, and there's so much passion there. And that didn't exist for me at the time. And I really struggled with that because it was a good job, a good company. But the problem was I commuted 2 hours each way. So 2 hours to work and 2 hours home. And my daughter was 1 at the time. And so I was commuting 4 hours a day. And I'd leave in the morning and she'd be sleeping. And I'd come home at night and she'd be sleeping. And I really was upset. And I was blaming everyone and everything for my situation, which was really an accumulation of my choices. So I was playing victim, little v victim, to basically everything that I've created for myself, but I wasn't taking any accountability for it. And I remember sitting outside one day, really reflecting on this, trying to figure out what do I need to do? So I can't give up work. I need to meet the needs that I'm getting paid for. I need the means, I need to take care of my family, but it's coming at the expense of me feeling like a dad, feeling like a husband. And I felt stuck on that line of resistance and that tug of war. And I realized that equation didn't work because no matter where I tilted, it was coming at the expense of the other side. And so transformational leadership for me is when you're not pitting one against the other, when you're actually figuring out how do we both win? How do we set things up so that you're not achieving one at the expense of the other, but instead you're creating a win-win for yourself. And so for me, I was stuck in that model. And I remember sitting outside, and really where we want to go first is to our values. And my hardcore value at the time was about family. And on reflection, I said, what's most important is to feel like a husband and a dad. So what can I do? How can I solve this puzzle? And just a small inspiration came over me. And I said, what if tomorrow I just go into work late and I spend the morning with my family, just 20 minutes. We just have a nice little breakfast. I won't be too late to work. I won't miss anything important. So I'm not going to be irresponsible there. And I can actually have that time that I've been craving so much with my family. And that one little shift, moving from the but to the and, completely lit me up. So it was about having both of them coexist together. And I remember calling my wife saying, hey, we're going to have breakfast tomorrow. And she was like, that's nice. It didn't seem very significant at the time. But I remember waking up the next morning after I had made that decision or created that intention. And I was ready to go. We all used to wear suits back then. I was ready to go at my normal time. And my wife came out and she saw me and she said, oh, I thought we're going to have breakfast, but you can still make your train. What do you want to do? And that's when I was at one of those decision points, what I call a moment of truth, where do I follow through on my intention or do I just get on with my day like I normally would? And it's so easy to get sucked into the current, the gravity of your normal day to day. It takes a lot to go against that current and really stay true to your intentions and turn those intentions into actions. And I thought about it and I had that tug of war. Finally, I said, you know what? The whole point was to be with you and to spend a little time together. Let's have that breakfast. And so we did a little nondescript little breakfast. And it felt so nice to be there with my daughter awake and my wife and our little family unit. And I remember getting on the train afterwards and I was just so lit up. I was so empowered. And as I'm in the train, a voice came over the loudspeaker and said, we're not stopping at the normal stop. We are going to continue on down to Wall Street, which was no big deal because commuting in New York City is a full contact sport. And so that really didn't register too much. But then I remember when we got down there, I got off the train and there was nobody on the platform. And that was kind of odd. And I walked up into this noise. And when I got to the top, I saw that we had been attacked. And I looked at my office, which was at the 96th floor of the North Tower of the World Trade Center, and saw that there was a big hole where my floor was. Because the day that I decided to have breakfast just happened to be 9/11, and I worked at the point of impact of the first plane on that morning. And so that was quite a shock. So I was down there. I didn't have to get out of anything. Certainly had to navigate the rest of that day, but that of course changed everything for me. The challenge was I didn't know what to do and I didn't know where to go. So I didn't have a direction to live into and I was stuck a little bit in that limbo. And so what I realized is that nobody was going to change anything for me. I had to own that myself. And that was the shift in mindset that I had to take on, is that I can't be a victim of my choices. I actually have to own my path. And I really applaud and celebrate all the courage it takes for all of your entrepreneurs that do the same thing. It's not the easier road. It's the more meaningful road for me and for many of us. And it's certainly not the easier path. And so when it comes, again, to transformational leadership, one of the core, I guess the core pillars there is to understand your values and understand what's important to you and what's going to create meaning for your life and what is the magic that you can bring to others in the world. And that was what I had set out on my journey to do after that experience. And one of the most important things, I do a lot of motivational speaking, and a lot of people say, oh, it was coming out of that experience, coming out of that tragedy, that you had to reinvent yourself. And yeah, that's all about that. But really, for me, the takeaway and the message I want to share with everyone here today is that I had my wake-up call on Monday, September 10th, because that's when I got back in touch with what was most important to me. That's where I took ownership of the decisions that I made, of my life. And it looked like a day, it was a day that looked like any other day. And that's the message. It's that you don't have to wait for a tragedy. You don't have to wait for a near miss. You don't have to wait to go through a hardship. In our country and our world has gone through so many hardships and continues to. If we're human, we're going to go through storms. We don't have to wait for some external event to cause us to make new choices. We just have to choose because we say so. We need to get in touch with the values that are really important to us and then start to take those small steps that start to align our behaviors in our life with the things that are most meaningful for us and for others. And that's the message that I want to take. And that's what human wake-up call means. It's not waiting for something else to give you that wake-up call, but creating one on demand for yourself just because you say so. So that's who I am. And that's the company I've created as a result of that journey.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. I remember when I first, met you and heard about your story, just ring home for me, because I don't know if I did share this with you, but when that happened at that time, I was in Paris on a board meeting with Emerson Electric, and we got a call from our boss's boss, who actually told us that, yeah, we got hit, and the second one came down, and we got stuck in Paris for 10 days, and because we couldn't fly back. For me personally, what actually has happened from that time on, I have completely changed the trajectory of my career. used to work for Fortune 500 companies and flying all around the world and, making great money, but really working for stale companies that just didn't impact anybody or anything. And now I'm doing everything about working with people in coffee. It's just a whole different human level. Talk about like human wake-up call. I get to work from, for me anyway, in my case, with one of the poorest country in the world, and it is a human wake-up call at the time, and it's more fulfilling for me. So I just always remember that 9/11 event, and I just couldn't wait to connect with you and have hear what you have to share with us. And I'm going to switch to Nora. Thank you so much for sharing your story, and I'll come back to it with more questions. But Nora, we share so much beliefs and as well so much practices in our daily lives and in coffee. And you've done so much work, and you're such a very familiar face in the Specialty Coffee Association in general, empowering local leaders where they are. Could you tell us a little more about some of your community projects and what you've been working on and how they have transformed the people who are involved?
Sure. Yeah, thank you for inviting me here and for allowing me to speak. And I think if you don't mind, what I would love to do is just share a little bit kind of how I got here, because I think it, in the context of leadership, I think it's important for this discussion in particular. And just, of course, listening to Mike speaking and sharing his story. It's the first time I'm hearing it, same as you who are attending. So it's, of course, very meaningful to hear it. And I will give away my age. I mean, normally I think people don't want to give away their age if they're older. And I feel like in coffee, and I'll get into this, but I struggled with being younger, actually, and having people kind of take me seriously as a result of that, or that's how I perceived it. Because I was in 7th grade at 9/11. So that was, I didn't have any idea what the World Trade Center was and the meaning of it. It didn't, it struck me that, we were attacked as a country. And, it was the first time I really even was aware to politics. That was, I think, a year after kind of even the first election I was really aware of as a, person. But yeah, so it struck me in a different way. And so that's my age, but I'm 32 now, so you're not doing the math. But my story of starting the Chain Collaborative, I think you mentioned passion. I don't know if Janine, you started with the word passion, or Mike, you picked up on passion, but that's what I had. I just had a lot of passion for what coffee could do. I started working in coffee as a barista during college. I actually went to school in New York City, at the New School, and I worked as a barista and saw that coffee could be a vehicle for connecting with the broader world, as well as playing a part in advancing livelihoods. And that's always been a passion of mine, is international and sustainable development. And so, coffee was a kind of a wonderful way to bring these two passions of mine together, coffee and international development. But in trying to get started in the world of coffee, it's a big world, and people have been in coffee for decades, and here I was, just someone who didn't have very much experience at all, but had this passion. And I think I really had to kind of push my way into having any role in coffee. And as a woman, especially, I think there's sort of that imposter syndrome where you feel like you're sort of nobody, and you're trying to get people to believe that you're somebody, but half the time you're not sure if you're somebody yourself. And so all of this is to say that I kind of looked at what I perceived to be my options. At the age of 25, I went to get my master's in sustainable development, and I did my research in evaluating the impact of a microfinance program for women in a coffee cooperative. I was lucky enough to be able to do that for my master's. But when I was going into the job world and thinking about the opportunities, I thought, well, at the time, this was 7-8 years ago, I thought, there's not that much going on in coffee in terms of sustainability that I was aware of. I think in the past decade, it's really become much more of a marketing tool, as well as business, really important to business is sustainability. And so I thought, well, anyone that I'm talking to and sharing this passion with isn't really giving me the time of day because I'm 25 and don't have enough experience. And there's so few jobs out there in nonprofit work and coffee and what I want to do. So I thought, well, I'll either wait, 10 years to even get a position I really want, or I'll just start it myself. And that's what I did. And I think because I was so young, I thought it would be easy. And, as Mike, you've said, taking the entrepreneurial road, it's not easy. And I think what I had at that time was the naivety to think it would be. But sometimes I think that's a little bit required of entrepreneurs, is to have this kind of crazy vision that you think that you can do it, and you end up doing it anyway, but kind of by the skin of your teeth. So that's what I did. And I've learned a lot about leadership, since then, because I've had to. I've had to learn, and I've had to teach myself. Nobody really taught me. But through the nonprofit that I started, what we do is we invest in local leaders in coffee communities to realize the visions that they have for their own community. So it's kind of, in certain ways, allowing people to do what I had the privilege to do, which was have a vision and resource myself to basically get that started and realize that vision. And what I think is different about that from many other nonprofits is the typical kind of development program is something that is planned by a company, perhaps, or a development organization, and they have kind of one model of doing things. They provide trainings, always, in the same way, maybe a little bit adapted per community, but sort of a similar training, a similar water program or a similar health program, and they provide it to different places. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I work with a lot of organizations that have their program and they provide it as a service around the world. But what we do is just different, and it's investing exclusively in the visions of local leaders and what they want to do in their own community. And that makes it hard because we do end up funding so many different things, because in one small community, you have, needs are holistic and they're varied. So often we find ourselves, being presented with a health project, and we've never managed a health project before. But it's the first time it's being presented, and it's the vision of a local leader. And so that's what we do, and that's what we invest in. And I'm conscious of the time. There's a couple more things I wanted to share, but I know we might have additional time. I don't know if I should share more, Janine, or what do you think?
That's good. We're going to switch. Thank you so much. Okay. First of all, as I say, I cannot wait actually to speak to you again more in regard to listening to the people. Yes. When you actually do listen to what people want to see, the answer most of the time is actually totally different than what you came to see, which I can share myself in my different role with the nonprofits that I'm involved with, that it's always just amazing, and also very transformational when you actually truly listen to what they need, because they know the answer of what they actually are looking for. They know the answer of the problem. And sometimes people from the first world, we tend to just not think about, we think that we know the best, we know what's right for them, but they actually know what's best and what's good for them. So thank you so much again for Nora for sharing, and I'll come back to you again here in a minute.
Great.
I will switch to Dr. Johnson, who also comes from the academia and who has been working on diversity and inclusion, which are called le mot du jour, or the day, the word of the day in English, which is a very high spoken about, a topic these days. And you coming from the academia world specifically, Dr. Johnson, if you don't mind me calling you Dr. Johnson, and academia is really a place where new things get developed and eventually get to the marketplace. Tell us a little bit about this intersection of leadership and diversity, and how is that actually helping companies, transform themselves, and what positive results have you been able to see that you can share with us?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you all. And I enjoyed hearing the stories of Mike and Nora. It's a great way to start the conversation. My perspective is very different because I'm a college professor and book author, but my wake-up call, I guess, to your first question, I think we've seen the same thing around diversity and inclusion. I think it was, 2016 with the Me Too movement, and there's this sudden wake-up call that at the time so many people were talking about the idea that there's gender equity in the workplace, you know, we fixed that problem by now. In fact, it was in 2016, I spoke at the White House for a summit on diversity in corporate America, and many chief diversity officers there were like, well, haven't we already kind of solved the gender thing? And that was before the Me Too movement started. And we were like, oh, wow, wake up call. No, we haven't. And I think we just experienced the same wake up call when it comes to racial inequality with George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, and just so many other lives that have been lost due to racial violence. So I think, again, companies are having this like wake up call. And so my perspective, or what I study, is what companies do that actually works to create more diversity and inclusion. So what are the Fortune 500 doing in response to this wake up call around racial inequality, and which of those actions work? And maybe I'll leave it there to say, as we engage in more dialogue, like I'm happy to share some of my insights and findings thus far, but I really want to hear more from the other panelists too. So I'll pause there.
Thank you. Thanks for you sharing your perspective. I'm actually going to ask you another question before I move to others. I guess, you know, what can you see that, I guess, us in the coffee industry, like maybe in any other industry, what power of harnessing the diversity that you have seen, that being maybe being mindful in how people are hiring within the organization, that can really be very transformational by really being able to harness the uniqueness that either exists within the organization, they can even bring it in the organization. I always look at, you know, potential innovation that can actually be leveraged from that point on. But I want you to kind of like expand a little bit on that topic, because I think it's a point of missing that you can maybe share more with us based on your research.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think coffee is actually pretty interesting and unique, just even hearing your stories, in that it's a very international business, right? Like you're going to need different perspectives. Who's the customer? Who's the target customer? It's everyone, right? And so you really need all of those different perspectives at the table when you're making decisions about procurement or marketing or leadership, if you're going to effectively serve your target customers, which is like basically, I think, everyone in the world, right? And so what power that can actually create is just a huge competitive advantage for those companies, especially small businesses, that are most effective at leveraging those different perspectives, which, you know, that is the complexity of diversity and inclusion. So you might have a very diverse company in terms of, we have a lot of representation. We have, you know, 55% women and 45% men, and we have 30% white and, you know, 50% Black and 20% Hispanic. But that's representation, so that's diversity. But the question is, do all of those voices get heard equally? Is everyone given the same opportunity to speak up? And if not, you're not really leveraging all of the benefits that that diversity has. To be fair, I think few companies are even that diverse. So I think there's like, yes, you have to work on inclusion, which is letting all voices be heard and letting people show up as their true and authentic selves. But I think we also have a lot of work to do in terms of just diversity, like getting the representation at all levels of the organization. So we don't have, you know, if there are 55% women, they're not all in, say, you know, customer service roles, and then men are primarily in sales oriented roles, which is a, you know, statistic that is reality, but isn't going to, that's not really diversity. That's not helping get those ideas flowing if everyone's just segregated into little silos.
Now, it's just to that point, can you speak a little more about your thought in leadership when it comes to actual leadership, diversity within leadership, or even just considering diversity within leadership? How is that? What can you share in that area? What have you seen, or what have you seen changing? Where are you actually seeing that? Is this worth it? Why doing it?
Yeah, I mean, that's the question, right? Like that's where the real gaps are when it comes to diversity, is at the top of organizations, in the leadership, who owns the companies, who's running the nonprofits. That's where we see the disparities. And the data are pretty clear that organizations with more diverse leadership, if you look at the executive leadership team or a corporate board, actually have greater innovation. So they file more patents. They're seen as more innovative in the marketplace. They have higher revenues, return on assets, even stock prices. So I think it really matters. I will just point out as the scientist that most of those studies that show those benefits, if you have a diverse corporate board or if you have a diverse C-suite, you have higher stock prices. They're really correlational. So we're looking at how has your C-suite changed, and then what is your stock price? And we can time lag that a year later or 6 months later, or a quarter later, whatever, controlling for market changes, because it's been a wild market, right? There's going to be differences just based on what industry you're in. But I will say, all of those, we can replicate all of those effects in a laboratory experiment where we, have leaders acting or, have people working in teams and making groups more or less diverse. And we get the same exact effect in terms of improved decision-making, reduced groupthink, greater innovation, as long as the group is inclusive. And so if you have a very diverse corporate board, which is one of the things I study is boards, if certain members on the board, like the non-majority group members, don't have the opportunity to really contribute and speak, then you don't really get the benefit of the diversity. It's just logic, right? If they're not sharing their perspectives, or they feel that I can't bring forth a really different viewpoint because that's not encouraged or welcomed, then you don't get all of those benefits. So you need both, the diversity, and then I think it's leadership. It could be, the highest ranking person in the room leadership, but I think it's really leadership. Everyone on this call has the power of leadership to make sure that other voices are heard, to really get those benefits of diversity.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll come back to you because I have so many questions for you. But let me switch back to Mike. Mike, to the same kind of a subject, what does it mean to have a conscious communication? Because I know that's one of the things that you talk about as well as in your work as a consultant. Can you tell us a little more about that? And how can that also lead into transformational leadership and also result in a company? Mike?
Yeah, sure. And first, I'd love to address just a little bit of what Stephanie said. So one of the good trends that I've seen in the clients that we work with, and we work with post-Series A and Series B companies, so small startups that have gotten funding of a couple of levels, we're seeing a lot more female leaders in roles of sales, of head of sales, COOs, things like that, CEOs. So we're starting to see that happening, which is obviously very long overdue. And so a lot of our clients are female executives that are now part of the executive team, which is awesome. And it definitely is important to have that diversity. One of the things that we focus on, we add a little neuroscience. And so we start digging into cognitive diversity, which is all about making sure that you're inviting in different ways of thinking about something, which ties into conscious communications and conscious capitalism, which really is the premise that we want to support the 3 Ps. We want to support profitability in certain ways because that makes things sustainable and enables things to have a bigger impact. And we want to support people. So we don't want to get profits at the expense of people. And we want to support companies that are doing good things in the world, planet. So when you can have people, profits, and planet all working together, that creates and that requires a transformational mindset to create innovative ways of addressing all of those different needs, which tend to, at surface level, go against each other. So we have leaders that originally think, I just want you to hit goals. I just want you to get to the outcomes. I don't care how you feel about it. I don't even care how you get there. Hit your goals. And the benefit of that is people get things done. The cost comes at the expense to the people and potentially to the planet. So when you over tilt there, that's not effective. It has a benefit, but it has a huge cost. When you over tilt on the people side, you have great chemistry, great cultures, great teams. However, a lot of those leaders have a hard time holding people rigorously accountable to performance. So you're getting a great team culture, but if you over tilt, it comes at the expense of performance, of the company performance. And so what we say is, why are we pitting one against the other? What we want to do is what we call integration. So instead of but, it's again what I said earlier, it's the and. How can we have it all? How can we make it all win? How can we meet all of those needs? And that starts with a mindset shift. So to me, transformational leadership is really integrative leadership. It's about not just validating and protecting your own needs, because we're all protecting things. We're protecting a relationship, we're protecting an outcome, we're protecting a process, we're protecting an idea. So it's about not giving up your idea or not giving up what you're protecting, but adding other people's perspectives and needs to that. And so that's the integration, that's the and. So if I really want to make sure that I have performance hit, I have to realize that as a leader, I'm driving performance through people. So I can use force, but force is not sustainable over the long term. There's too much of a cost. So how do I use influence? Well, in order to use influence, I need to be able to understand what their needs are. In order to understand what their needs are, there has to be trust. In order to have trust, I need to be able to take on some risk and vulnerability. So how do we create companies that enable people within the organization to move away from protective behaviors and move towards problem solving, radical collaboration? And it takes an incredible shift away from this protection and the way organizations are structured, even from a competency and a compensation point of view, which services your needs, to how do we play together? How can we all be in the same boat? How can we make sure that we're playing with and for each other so that everybody wins, including the planet, including the people, and including the company itself? And that all starts with a shift in mindset. So for me, the conscious communication is the messaging that creates the opportunities and the environment that enables this to happen.
Beautiful. I love it. People, planet, profits, all at once. I call that holiness, really. And I guess to that, I'm going to swing back to Nora. And Nora, you've been very involved with what we called, or you called, or maybe the group called the Creators Group that has been involved in the coffee sustainability program. Can you tell us a little more about that? Because it's funny, because I see a lot of what Mike just shared, just like being part of some of the work that you've done, and maybe most people have not heard about. Can you share a little bit about us? About this with everybody else here?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, just to kind of connect and pick up on what my colleagues have said. Yeah, just for anyone who's listening and kind of thinking, okay, but you both are coaches or, study this. And so what does it look like to really be a leader who has to follow, what you're being told? And, at least for me, I felt like, just last year we went through after I did the Creators Group, and I will get to that, I promise, but we did a whole diversity training on our board, and I hired a diversity consultant. But part of me was thinking, I just want to break. I do not want to take on more stuff at my nonprofit and do more things, and I just really want to break. And but I knew it was so important to the growth of the nonprofit to do this. And I think once you're in it, you do realize how transformational it all becomes, because it's not just, it doesn't add another thing on your plate. It becomes a transformation and change of how you do business. And so, I think that's just, something to think about. But in terms of diversity, that was a new kind of diversity work for us, but it's always been, we've looked at diversity, income diversity to succeed as a nonprofit. And so one of the things that we did a couple of years ago and pitched the idea of was to build this sustainability curriculum for the Specialty Coffee Association. And the idea was, we're seeing all these, this education in the barista skills and sensory and roasting, but there's no one that's really training specifically on sustainability. And so I came together with recruited people for Creators Group, as well as people to review the curriculum throughout the industry, to build something that would be global. But the global, training of it it's as complicated as kind of what is the work that we do when we work with so many different local leaders. I think one of the challenges is, it is that communication. How do you share something that is so complex, sustainability, people, planet, and profit, and so much more? How do you share that, in such a way under one banner and one curriculum that is going to be global, and ideally everyone's going to follow this and learn something no matter where they're from. And I could talk on and on about, I think, what I've learned, doing that, and what I think could be improved and what I think could be updated about it. But but I find, you know, just kind of also reconnecting back to the work that we do on the ground with local leaders and investing in their visions. I mean, you know, as you said, Janine, we trust completely in their vision and that they know their community and that they know what's best. But what is challenging is expressing kind of what we do in such a way that that indicates and accounts for how you have to approach every relationship differently because people are so culturally different, but still kind of do the same things, you know, have the same types of conversations and, you know, try to invest in leadership in a similar way that you can communicate it to the outside world, but also account for kind of the cultural differences. And so I think since we had the experience of doing that through our work, it was kind of a little bit easier to translate that, you know, through sustainability. But I think one of the other challenges with all this work, when it does come to diversity, equity, inclusion, is a lot of this research, and I'm sure Stephanie, you'll have some opinions on this too, it comes from a very Western and even English language. A lot of these resources about leadership and transformational leadership and, you know, transformational change. And I've recently been trying to have these conversations more and more with our partners, and there's a very different engagement with it, right? In terms of what is sort of meaningful to our partners, because we might hear diversity as kind of one thing, but you know, often people are looking towards me and my board, are we diverse? But if they look towards the board for our partners in Uganda, they're okay to see, you know, entirely Ugandan leaders, right? And so there's a different expectation, you know, obviously for very different reasons. But I think it is a bit hard when you're trying to build something that's kind of global and share the skills that you have, and there's just such kind of different expectations, you know, for different people. So, you know, it's in some way or another, I think we're always thinking about diversity, inclusion, and leadership. And how those expectations really differ, you know, across the world, and kind of what that means for how we communicate effectively and sort of similarly, you know, across the board. So lots of things I just shared, but I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, thank you. I think that's you very much brought about diversity, which you know. Not, you know, intentionally, maybe something that you actually work on, which is kind of always very interesting, because like in my world, for us, you know, when we comes to working in a place like Burundi, one of our way of talking about diversity is actually being able to actually, you know, bring those who've been marginalized, those who've been forgotten, put on the side. And especially like in my world, where I come from Africa, that's most of the time women who are just like behind the scene and doing all the work, but really are not being brought forward into the leadership. And actually, when you start bringing them more to the, you know, to the table, and they really start seeing what I call true transformational, you know, communities, even addition to, you know, to bring, giving them a chance to actually be able to lead. Stephanie, I will swing back to you and ask, you know, what style, what's transformational leadership style have you seen emerging and potentially very successful for organization that maybe you can share with our group here, that they can, you know, take forward and hopefully implement their own work?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll echo what Nora said also, though, just to say that even though we're talking about diversity, that we're still not being very diverse when we just take such a US-centric perspective. And there's a large global oil and gas company that had these very specific goals for diversity in the US, and they tried to use the same goals in Latin America. And they had goals like the number of Latinos and the number of African Americans. That's not even like appropriate terminology, right? So that there's like, you know, many layers here, but I think you're quite right that oftentimes what we're talking about, cognitive diversity, as Mike said, but also the idea of supporting groups who may not have received support in the past. So the type of transformational leadership style, you know, I feel like that is really a constellation of skills that we're probably talking about more than any one style, because I hate to imagine that when it comes to diversity and leading inclusively, that there's like a type of person who can do that. I actually think we are all powerful and able to do that and should be doing that. Even if you're, you know, a transformational leader a charismatic leader or an authentic leader. Like there's lots of terms, but I really think it's just about, I'm going to quote the Army here. This is their 2021, I guess, strategic imperative is put people first. And that's not what we always think of for like the Army, but focusing on your, people's mental health and people's career development and treating people fairly and equally and giving them voice. Like, I feel like that is the style of leadership, having empathy and concern for people, that is going to help foster diversity and inclusion. I'm super sensitive to Mike's point too of like, yes, there's other P's, like people and profits and planet. And of course, you're not going to help any of your people if your business goes under. And so profits matter. And none of us are going to be helped if our planet continues down the path that we're on of global climate change. And so those are, equally important levers that we need to be pushing and pulling. But when it comes to leading people, I think it's like, be a human being, right? Like work on empathy. It's not a trait that some of us are born with. It's a skill. It's a muscle that you need to exercise. And it is about listening to people and trying to understand or put yourself in their place and their perspective without judgment to see where they're coming from. And I mean, to me, this is like the ultimate leadership skill. All of the, so like for my research for my book, I interviewed Fortune 500 CEOs who are like the people who are doing a great job on diversity. And they all had that same answer. Like, what's the secret? They're like, we just listen to people and we try to understand where they're coming from, and that informs our leadership and our ability to create, transformative change or greater equality in the workplace or in the world. I think if you could just understand other people's perspective, I think that would solve so many of the problems that we have.
Beautiful. Understanding other people's perspective. Boy. And I know a lot of our world still have a lot of ways to go and work to do. And switch back to you, Mike, because I think this is also another area of your expertise. What does transformational conversation means to you, and why does it matter?
Yeah, it's what Stephanie is saying. The way that we define it is seek understanding. That's the mantra that we try to teach to leaders. And understanding means that you have to move your judgment aside and you have to listen, just exactly as you've said. And it can be really hard because, again, you have certain leaders that are on the hook for results, and there's a lot of pressure and they're moving very fast, and the competitive landscape is very difficult. And so the drivers are all about profits, that P. And when you say, well, you need to have empathy, they say, no, I don't. They equate that with being soft or being nice. And what we have to reteach them is that empathy, as you said, Stephanie, empathy is not about being soft or nice. It's not about making you a nice person. This is about helping you understand others. Because it's really, as you said, stepping into their shoes. We have to put it into the frame of a value equation for certain leaders so that they understand the value of empathy. Not even because they don't necessarily even believe it as a principle, which you can judge right or wrong, but how are you going to influence them? You need to speak their language. So we have to figure out what is the language that's going to influence them, and how do we give them the value of empathy so that they can appreciate the impact of it and they can integrate that into what they're doing. Otherwise, they resist very, very strongly. And on the other side too, transformational conversations. So these are the conversations we have. A transformational leader needs to be a coach. They need to be a facilitator. They need to be a visionary. They need to have excellent execution. Doesn't mean they're doing all that, but they need to be a stand for all of those things. So for me, a transformational leadership holds a space where all of these things that we're talking about, racial and gender and income and cognitive diversity, are all respected and invited in. Different ways of being, different mindsets, different perspectives, different ideas, they're all invited into the mix. And that leader has to role model that through their behavior by seeking understanding, listening, calling people out on behaviors that are not aligned with that because of the cost that they bring in, having the courage to be able to do that, even in the face of a groundswell of other sentiment. It takes a lot of courage sometimes to be a transformational leader and to stand out, because you have to do things differently than they've been done. That's what makes it transformational. So there are a lot of competencies, and there's a lot going into the mindset of that kind of leader. And all of the change happens through conversation. So you also need to be able to express what you're trying to push or move or pull or inspire or motivate or direct or hold accountable. It's just, you need to really be flexible and agile and be able to kind of pivot to what's needed. So being a transformational leader is not one dimensional, it's multi-dimensional, and it's a challenge. It's definitely a challenge, because we tend to have preferences and strengths in one area, and a lot of times we'll avoid the areas that we're not as strong in because we don't want to look bad or feel stupid or fail. So we need to have an environment that invites us in to be able to make mistakes too, even as we're the leader and even as we grow. So it's a big ask.
Very nice. It's a big ask. I'm going to switch a little bit, because I'm also being conscious about people who are on the call who probably might have some question. I would love to hear actually from the audience. What does it mean to you, people who are seeking to understand you, for wherever you might stand? If you're not in a leadership position and you want your leader to understand where you're coming from, what does that mean to you to seek understanding? And how can one do that successfully? I would love to, we're opening the floor here for the audience and the listeners as well to bring any question they have for, because we can go on, as you can tell, from the amazing panelists that we have this afternoon. So please ask any question you want. This is your moment.
I think probably, I'm sure Stephanie might have more interesting answers to this question, but I would say, just to the question that Muncie asked about, how can employees support organizations? I think in my experience, it is very special that an employee would do that if they also don't have the culture in the organization that the leaders create that makes that kind of their influence and their voice being heard, if they feel comfortable to kind of move into that space. So I think it's kind of, I have found it's very much like a two-way street. If you want your employees to perform and really shift your organization as well, you need to create that space, and it can be very hard. So that's exactly why, Mike and Stephanie do this research and have the jobs that they do. But yeah, that's been my experience.
I'll add, I feel like I love that you use the term, Monty, of performative diversity. And I think that's where a lot of companies are. They're like, okay, people, this is a hot topic. Let's create an employee resource group. Or, oh, we got to do unconscious bias training, and that checks a box. And now we can go back to doing whatever we're doing. And of course, there's so much more that leaders can do to really create meaningful diversity. But if you're not the person who runs the company or the nonprofit, I think all of us can be better allies. Like, this is something I struggle with every day. Like, you can consider, who is it that you recommend when you're suggesting someone for an opportunity or a job, or and just look at that list if you can come up with it, and ask yourself if the people on that list just look a lot like you. Because that's what we usually, when we study networks and how people hire and promote, we promote people who look just like us. I have a mentee, I'm in Colorado, but she's from Los Angeles, just like I am. She's Mexican-American, just like I am. And she's a first-generation college student, just like I am. And when I first met her, just like talking to her, her accent is it's like very California. And I was just like, there's just something about her I like so much. I don't know what it is. And then I'm like, oh wait, no, I do know what it is. She reminds me of me. And I think everyone does that. And that would be not that problematic, except it doesn't really bring in diverse perspectives. And if you look at power structures, if we all are doing that, it means that the most often people who get high-level promotions and opportunities are going to be white men, just statistically. So it's important to consider your network, who you're affiliating with, who you get to know deeply, like who are you connecting with in your community, who's in your network. I would suggest for folks, this is hard right now with COVID, but I sit on all of the diversity committees in my professional field. There's a women's group and a people of color and LGBTQ. And like, I just go and try to network the same way I would, and I do, for the leadership researchers networking group, because I'm not going to meet those people. I'm not going to meet people who might be different from me if I don't actively seek them out, because we're all just siloing ourselves with people who are similar. In fact, that's what networking usually is, right? It's like, let me find someone who shares a similarity and therefore we'll connect. And maybe we need to rethink that idea, I guess. And networking should be, how can I find people who are different from me and can inform not only what I'm doing, but can create new connections where I can recruit from related industries, or, you know, if we have a position open, have a bigger pool of people to search from. And like, even in small ways, I think we can be allies to each other. Like if you're sitting in a Zoom room and someone like me is just like talking endlessly, or if I interrupt someone else, I interrupt Nora, sorry, Nora, you know, Monty, you can say, oh, Stephanie, I really do want to hear your great point. And I wasn't quite finished listening to Nora's perspective, which is really valuable coming from the coffee industry. And it's not like to be harsh on me, but it's to say like, you know, certain people get the majority of the airtime. Like there are studies, there's an app you can download on Apple if you have a Mac that will measure how much time men and women speak during your Zoom meeting. And you can see it tends to be more majority members speak more white individuals speak more than people of color, men speak more than women. Extroverts speak more than introverts. You know, this, you're thinking of cognitive diversity, like introverts have a wealth of information and perspective to offer, but they don't get a moment on the Zoom because certain people are spending the whole time talking. You're really not even getting the best outcome. It's not even just about like, let's be an ally to be nice. It's like, let's be an ally to improve our business too.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Jenny, could I address Marcus's question?
Please, yes, I was
Okay.
actually going to pose that question. Excellent. Yes, please.
Awesome. And Marcus, nice to see your face. Thanks for turning on your video. So how do you lead or manage up? It's a great question because you don't have organizational influence to just mandate a change. So you need to have other ways of influencing. And a lot of what we want to do is we want to understand that person's language. First of all, we can't make them wrong for how they are, because they're not going to change because we don't like the way they are. So if you can let go of that, it's going to keep you empowered. What are your expectations of them? Frustration is an unmet expectation. So if you look at where you're frustrated, it's typically because you have a different expectation for either the person or the situation. So just be aware of that. It's actually generated from yourself. So I'll give you an example in terms of language. And this, a lot of this is based in brain science and neuroscience. I was working with a training team, and they spent 3 months putting together the year-long training plans, and they had a 90-slide PowerPoint deck, which was beautiful. They spent so much time on the colors and the slides, and it was really a work of art. And they went into the CFO, a woman CFO, and they asked her, take a look at our deck, we need to get our budget. And she said, okay, and she started from the bottom, found the numbers page. There was one slide with numbers, flipped the entire deck over, looked at it for about 7 seconds and says, okay, you have your budget. And they were so upset. They got their budget for all their programming and they were so upset. Why? Because they had a different expectation. She didn't appreciate all the time we put in, all the effort we did. She didn't even look at our designs. She didn't even see the impact of the programs. No, that's not her language. Her language is, what are the finances? What are we investing in? And what's going to be the ROI on that at a high level? And so if they knew that, and they expected that going in, they could have taken that one slide, put it on top, and everything else would have been referenced. And that's how they would have been able to manage up a little bit and lead. So you want to understand, again, seek understanding. You want to understand the language of the person you're trying to influence, up, down, or sideways, and learn how to speak their language. Is it data? Is it facts? Is it detail and linear and sequential? And they are risk managers. And so if I introduce crazy or off the cuff ideas, they're going to protect that. Is it somebody who needs rapport built in order to build trust and start to trust what I'm saying? So do I need to focus on developing more of a relationship, even more than the facts or the process? Or is it really about the idea and the big picture and the trends in the future? So we all have these different brain languages. And by going deeper and understanding those, we find that it gives you a much greater sense of being able to communicate, as we said, transformational communication in a way that your message is going to be received. And when your message is received, that's when you have more impact. That's when you have more influence. That's how you can manage, regardless of the level in the organization of where they are. Does that make sense?
Perfectly. Nora, you have a point on that?
Yeah, just wish that I could. This is recorded. I feel like I need to give this to people, because I think, yeah, I agree. If people approached me speaking my language as a leader within our own staff, I think things would have worked out less frustratingly for them. But yeah, I'm looking at the other questions here, and looking at this question of how to find and connect to people who are different from me. I think it is so much of what we do in coffee. I think Stephanie, you had mentioned it, just like your customers and the people that you're speaking to. I mean, they're just so diverse from all over the world. And even when we think about diversity in coffee, it's like geographic, and it's gender, and it's race, and it's so many different things. And it can be so challenging to figure out like who really is my audience. And I think what I've learned, and kind of this, I don't know if it's because of the radical changes, Grace, you mentioned in the past year, but in our work and investing in the visions of local leaders, it was really all about development. That we think that investing in local leaders is the best way to create livelihood change in communities, investing in their leaders. And it was never really about leadership. It was not about, we feel like we're an organization that are, we're experts at leadership, and so we're gonna invest and make better leaders. I think we've actually come around to that and realized, we've learned a lot about leadership in having to create a position for us in the industry. And so are we missing something where we're not actually sharing what we know with the local leaders that we invest in? So I think we've actually had this shift where it started out about livelihood development, and now we're realizing that there is such a connection between being a great leader and facilitating that. And leaders are always, it's never like I've arrived, I have become the leader I want to be. It is a process that you're always having to learn, and to really be a good leader, you never stop learning. And so I think we're trying now to kind of build that, more into what we do. And, we're actually thinking of changing our mission statement, because our mission statement right now is really mostly related to our investment program. But there's a lot of other things we do, and for income diversity. We do consulting work, we provide courses. And if I can think about, one thing that is similar to all of that, we're somehow investing in leaders, whether it's through courses, and we're teaching people and training them in coffee sustainability so they can take action. We're investing in leadership in that way. And so I think, within that, our responsibility is also just to understand the diversity of this industry, and that's cultural. Yeah, I see Mike took himself off mute, and there's another question, so maybe I'll turn it over to somebody else.
No, take your time. I just wanted to add on what you were saying, Janine, if I may.
Please.
A lot of, and maybe some of you out there that are owners or experts, a lot of the work that's needed to be done with leaders is to get them to stop fixing problems. So they become the hub and everyone else becomes the spoke, and there's only so much capacity. They become the bottleneck and the constraint for the company. And as the company grows, everybody still goes to the leader to say, help us fix this. And the leader loves that, because then they get to fix things. And the challenge and the opportunity is when you as a leader actually learn how to develop your people into thought leaders themselves. So instead of you owning the thinking and you owning the fixing, you stand for the resolution of something, and you demand thought and problem solving from your people, because that's transformational, is exponential. It's not incremental. It's not 1 + 1, it's 10 × 10. And in order to do that, it's not you times 10, it's leveraging all of your people at the highest level that you can leverage them. And the way to do that is not to have them just follow your orders, but to have them also bring their own thinking and their own, all of their own wisdom and their own experience and their own ideas into the mix, into the solutioning. And so one of the biggest challenges is what we call managing the fixer inside all of us. And so many of you might recognize and feel a little guilty about that, because you know what, you're adding value. You're adding value in the short term, and there's needs, and who can do it like me, and how is it going to get solved as fast as I would do it? Those are all traps. Those are all blocks. At some point, we've got to develop our people to be thinking too. So one really easy way to do that is just what we call a simple redirect. And I'm sure the other panelists would agree and know this technique very simply, which is when somebody comes to you and says, what should I do? You just redirect it right at them. Say, I don't know, what do you think you should do? And next time, I'm always going to ask you to think about it first. So before you even come to me, assume I'm going to ask you, what do you think? Then come to me and say, here's the problem. Here's what I think. Here are my thoughts on this. Here are some options. Here's what I recommend. Now, what do you think? And we want to develop them into those systemic thought leaders before they just come to us reactively with a problem. And then we, like Pavlov's dog, just react with an answer. So we have to pause and redirect so that they are forced to be accountable for the problems, for the thinking around the problems. We are still accountable ultimately, but this way everybody develops, everybody grows. And that's critical for transformation to happen within any organization, any function, any leader.
This is absolutely marvelous. I know we're at the top of the hour, and I'm just now getting to be very excited to hear even more of my panelists, sharing to everybody. So I hope that who did not get a chance to actually participate and come forward to the talk today can be able to listen to this because it's recorded. But I also would like to ask two questions from the panelists. One is, what is one piece of advice would you leave to anybody who's listening to you now, or even who's going to be listening to this recording, an advice that they can take home to really bring forward this transformational leadership that we all need now, moving forward, as our world has actually become a whole different place. And the other thing that I would like you to do, please share your information. So if anyone wants to reach out to you for some, consulting, speaking engagement, you name it, they will know how to find you as well. So, well, who wants to start with this one piece of advice that we can share with anybody? Anybody can jump in.
I'll start since I'm off mute. It's my advice to you, it's really a mindset. It's that we're humans and there are many storms that we're going to be going through in our lives. 9/11 was a storm. COVID is a storm. Places that coffee is produced go through many storms. And there's always, always, always a gift of the storm. And it's up to us to find it and create it from what's there. It doesn't minimize the loss and the pain and the challenge that we experience with the storm. It's up to us to then take that and make it mean something. So what are we going to do with this gift that we've been given? Life is a gift and every single day counts. And you all have everything you need to get started. And we're not going to wait until some external force tells us that it's time for us to get aligned with our values. Today is that day that we've been waiting for. Today's our wake-up call. And the question is, what are you going to do about it? And that's the question I'm going to leave with you guys. What are you going to do with this opportunity, with this gift that you've been given?
You'll make me want to cry. Who wants to go next? This is just beautiful.
I'll share mine. Yeah, similar, I think, to one of the first words Mike mentioned is values. I think just, knowing what your values are, staying aligned to those values, understanding that the partners you have, are they value aligned as well? Even in coffee, it's not about, to me, diversity and finding the right partners. It's not about, is this a group that's different than me? Because it is, if you're working with people throughout the world, they're going to be different than you in some way, but are they value aligned, is really important. So there can be a diversity of ways that their values, intersect with yours, but I think that's something that you sort of can't compromise. And then I would say as well, just kind of lean into it. Like this, I don't know, sometimes I listen to leadership podcasts sometimes and it's like, oh, there's like another thing I have to do, or like I went through this whole diversity thing on the board and now they're like, oh, but wait, you can diversify your staff and your fellowship program and this. And it's just like, I just spent a year and a half on this. But you have to lean into it because at the end of the day, it does transform you and your business. And I say that on the other side. So I have sympathy for everyone who's thinking about going into it now, but yeah, just lean into it if you can, for sure, but be kind to yourself while you're doing that too.
Beautiful. Thanks, Noah. Dr. Johnson?
Yeah, I'll say, I feel like this has been like a very difficult, traumatizing year with lots of wake-up calls and made people question their values and in many ways presented a lot of crises, but it also has presented an opportunity in that all the ways we used to do things in the workplace are done. We've redone everything. There's nothing the same about my job that there was before COVID. And that is really threatening. Oh my gosh, big changes, but it's also a huge opportunity, because when this workforce that we're all a part of was created, and around the Industrial Revolution, it was not a very diverse workforce. Empathy wasn't the most important leadership skill. And I think what this 2021 and 2022 offer is an opportunity to redesign the workplace in a way that works for everyone, a way that works for moms and people of color and persons with disabilities, and a way that promotes mental health in a way that it hasn't in the past. I don't think the workforce was working, and now it's fully broken, but we get a chance to put it back together.
Thank you. Beautiful, beautiful. I think, like you all said, it's an opportunity. This crisis is an opportunity. The time is now. I can actually tell you that my world today is not what it was last year. I guess this is just also me being an entrepreneur. I always just see every single crisis as an opportunity. There's just tremendous opportunity in front of us, an opportunity for leadership, an opportunity to change our world for the better, for the best, every single day. Like Mike said, the wake-up call is here every day. What are you doing with it today? How you bring that transformational leadership within your organization where you are. So I invite all of you who are listening to us to just think about this, and hopefully you can learn from all these beautiful and powerful panelists that we have today, and they all have shared the information. This is recorded, so this information is going to be available in the future, and you can hopefully reach out to them. If you can't, you can reach to me, you can reach to the SCA staff. So we are all here to serve each other and really to help each other grow, and to all bring transformational leadership everywhere we are, if it is at home or if it is in other part of the world. So thanks again for being part of this discussion today. I'll see you next time.
Bye. Thank you so much.
See you then. Cheers. Be well.